Hi, I'm Bearcroft, and today I'm going to show you how to do some pyrography, the cute little hedgehog on a cheeseboard. So to start with, I've just made a little sketch, graphite pencil sketch of a cute little hedgehog on this miniature cheeseboard. And I'm going to start off with a reasonably low setting. It's probably about halfway up on the scale on my machine, so not too hot, not too cold, somewhere in the middle. And it's always a good idea to have a little bit of spare wood by the side where you can test it before you make some marks. So if I just stroke it like that, you can see that it's making a reasonably fine mark, not too dark. I just about see it. So that's going to be my starting strength, where I'm going to begin just some general outlining with that. So using the edge of that loop of wire. So this is quite a common shape to have on the end of your machine, your tool, or pen as it's called. But you can buy lots of different variations on that, some with a point, some with a blade, and of course some with wire. And the best thing to do is find out what suits you best and experiment. This is a good way to get some nice sort of sharp prickles, or begin to get some sharp prickles. There's lovely V shapes. So this will be, in a sense, our starting sketch. And what you're looking for at this point is something that, in terms of temperature, something that will allow you to make sort of fairly steady strokes like this without over burning. So if your pen is too hot, and what you'll find is if you start to make a fairly steady, slow sketch movement like this, it will burn the wood very quickly. And if I move it a little bit quicker, then I'll get a lighter tone. So here and there, especially on the ends of the prickles, I want a nice sort of fairly dark tip. And this is about what this level will give me. If you're unsure, just test it on a piece of wood first before you commit to your actual pyrography piece. So once it's burnt, there's no going back. So it's just a case here of getting quite a number of these prickles established, these sort of V shapes. And if you're not sure about freehand drawing your image on the wood to start with, then you can always use a trace down paper. Graphite trace down paper will do nicely, or ordinary tracing paper, and do a reverse image. So whatever suits. And of course the graphite will erase afterwards. Just a normal soft eraser will get rid of that for you. So I'm trying to make all these prickles slightly different sizes and not too regular. So the sketch was my initial guideline. I was sort of improvising on that as I worked through, as you would with for example, a pen drawing. You start off with a basic graphite sketch and then improve on that, add more detail with your pen. So imagine this is just like a waterproof indelible pen. Again, which once it's on your paper is there for good. So this is no different in that sense. You just got to take a little bit more care in making your marks, of course, with a pen and with a pyrography pen too. Now this particular bit of wood that I'm using here, just a cheap old cheeseboard you get from one of these sort of fairly discount hardware stores, something like that. Absolutely fine for doing this pyrography work on it. Of course, it hasn't got too much of a grain. It's got a visible grain, but not a deep grain, so it's quite smooth, which will enable you to get finer lines, of course, and a little bit more control as well. So you'll find if you have something that's got a lot of actual grain that you can feel, then that will translate into your pen work, your pyrography pen work. Because if you go over lumps and bumps, your line won't be quite as smooth. So I'm still using the edge of the wire, as you can see. And when I come to a heavier piece in a minute, the edge of the ear, I'm going to use the sort of full loop. And that'll give me a thicker mark. Just pressing on ever so slightly around the edge of the ear and then lifting off to create a sort of dissolving edge, if you like. And we can come back and actually shade the ear in later. So let's do some features. A little bit of fur around the eye. And the eye itself, again I'm going to use the edge of the wire very carefully. You can probably sense me holding my breath while I'm doing this. So we need to get the eye shape correct, of course. And naturally we'll leave the highlight. Another thing you can do, by the way, when you've pyrographed your piece, if you want to add colour to it, you can use basically anything, from oil to acrylic, even watercolour, as long as you do some spray varnish over your watercolour. When it's done, you can use that, gouache, coloured pencil, whatever you like, as long as you protect it. Let's do a nice, careful line around his snout, tip of the nose there, or the nostril. And I'll give him a little smile. And then lower jaw, and it'll start to relax a little bit more now we get down to the chest and the belly. And not forgetting his little claws, so we'll have some claws, back claws showing. More feet, these are his back feet, little claw. Again, another little claw, and a little front foot showing here. Get all those toes in, and the claw. And then maybe just have a little shadow area, very short grass fading out over the right, just to give him something to sit on, an anchor point if you like. So we'll sketch that in first. then what I'm going to do is I'll pop the pen down in its holder there and just take a soft rubber, this is a putty rubber, and just erase the pencil marks. I don't need those anymore. There we go. You can use a plastic eraser if you want to. Always find a putty rubber will lift out the graphite a lot easier, especially if you've got a slight bit of texture underneath. So that will leave us with a nice clean or cleaner image. Also find the putty rubber is good at lifting off any little bits of grime that you might have on your bit of wood, if it's left lying around, for example. That's it. It gives it a nice clean image. Then we're going to do some shading. So for that, I'm going to use a little bit of the rounded end of our wire, almost like a spoon tip. I'll show you on this little sample bit of wood what will happen there. If I press on like that and lift, that will give me a sort of thick, heavier mark, but still some control. Now then what happens if I turn that up to full, which I've just done, turn that up to full strength and do the same, you'll see the difference here. Immediately there's a lot more smoke, a lot less control. It's going to give me a much heavier mark, which is great if you want to do some really dark shading. So for example, if you want to do some textured background, turn it up to full like that and just use the end of your wire, the curved end of the wire, to build up texture. Just press on like so. Okay, I'm going to turn it back down again a little and using a combination of line shading with the edge like that, or rounder end shading like that, particularly around the ears, we can begin to add some tone. So if we start with the ear, what we're going to do, the ears are quite dark anyway, just going to gently drag the rounded end, think of it as like a thicker paintbrush, from the edges of the ears where we started to the inside of the ears. You can see that gradually getting darker. I'm moving it quite quick. So if I slow it down here, then it gives the wire more time on the wood, therefore it burns it more, makes a darker mark. If you move it quite quickly, then you're going to get a more controlled shading. But what you should never do is just sit there with the end of your pyro pen, the wire, sitting on the wood without giving it any attention. So you can always go over a light layer again, that's the important thing, but you can't lift out the dark layer. So that gives us a nice tone in the ear. We're going to do the similar thing with his nose as well. I've got the nostril in there, so I'm going to move it quite quickly around the tip of the nose. Just to gradually darken that. So you can see that's made his nose a little bit darker. And then in between some of these spines as well. So for example, if I go in between those V shapes, like that, then what that does, it gives me a nice gradiated shading, sort of leaving the tips of the spines a little bit paler and darker in the centre. Let's try another couple here. Start way down in between the spines there, and then slow down the pen, lighten the touch a little bit as you want to let that tone fade. Again down here, so nice from dark, and then push that up into a lighter tone. Again, just a couple more, then I'll crack on. Start in between the spines. Let's see, a fast movement will give you a lighter shading. If I want it darker, we just linger on it a little bit more. So I tend to do a large part of the whole image on this sort of midway setting. Depends on the wood as well. If you have a base wood that's unvarnished, quite blonde actually, base wood as well, you'll get a lot of contrast on there, and you'll find that even on the lowest setting, where you barely would see a mark on this kind of wood, on a bit of really pale base wood, then that mark would show up quite well, and it will give you an opportunity to do much more subtle shading. So if you wanted to do something a little bit more realistic with lots and lots of subtle shading or extremes of tone, from very, very dark on your highest setting to very almost invisible pale tone, but you'll just about see it on your lowest setting, you can do the full range on a pale wood. If you're using a darker wood, something darker than this, then you can still pyro on dark wood of course, but then if you use a lower setting, even a mid setting like this, you're not going to see much of it because the wood's very dark. So you have to bear in mind the surface as well. And of course, a lot of people don't realise you can actually use pyrography on paper. Watercolour paper is very popular, good quality, heavy duty watercolour paper. It's not going to set fire to the paper. Strangely enough, it won't. You'll find that if you use a good quality white or sort of cream, off-white watercolour paper, again you can use a much bigger variety of tones on there. So you can do some very, very, very light strokes. So if you want to have a go and you haven't got any wood and you want to buy, you know, a startup iron, you can buy startup irons from any hobby store or online. They don't have to be expensive to start with. I just try it on some watercolour paper to begin with. And believe me, you'll be surprised, you won't set it on fire. And I've tried, and deliberately tried to set the paper on fire with a pyrography iron, it won't work. So there's a nice sort of mid-tone shading now in between these spines. Once I've done that, I'm just going to pick out some little bits of detail with the darker tone. You can almost paint with this, as you can see. Almost paint that very, very pale brown tone into that wood. Essentially what you're doing is a sort of hatching shading, and you can do cross hatching, all manner of shading with your iron. So you can shade the individual toes, leave the highlights of course. Go over again, add more shadows. We use the rounded end to get a sort of softer tail, and the tail isn't going to be that spiky, a bit like the ear. That overall sort of general shading with the rounded end. Again, if in doubt, move your pen quite quickly to start with. If you find it's not dark enough for you, and let it dwell on the wood just a tad more, and you will get the feel for how quickly to move it and how much to press on. You don't need to really press on at all with a pyrography pen or an iron, so there's no need to dig in. Just let the heat do the job for you. Always start with a sort of mid to low setting at any rate, and then once you build up your confidence, then you can go move to a higher setting. And indeed, when you're doing something like this, if you start off with a mid to low setting, get your general shading, the softer outlines done first, and then finish off with your dark tones on a really high voltage setting, then you've got used to it. So if you don't do it that often, if it's something you pick up, I don't know, once every few weeks, then it's nice to have a little sort of remind yourself of how the pen works. And maybe get a little bit of scrap wood and just make a few marks on there. Get a feel for it first. Now as the wire gets used, you will find, not doing a small piece like this, but if you're doing a larger piece or several smaller pieces, you'll find you'll get a build-up of material on the end of the wire, like sooty deposits if you like, and then just clean that up once it's cooled down, of course. Clean that up with a bit of fine grade sandpaper, and it'll be good as new again. And if the wire breaks, you can get replacement wires. You just loop into there, screw it in, make any kind of shape you want on the end with a pair of pliers, and again, very, very cheap. So I'm going to go on to some darker shading any minute now. I'm going to carve out just one or two more softer spines. And I'll have a little bit of soft shading around there. And work quickly when you're doing gentle shading like that. Careful not to let the pen linger on the wood on little areas like so. So now we'll switch the heat up, turn up the heat literally, and just check it on the spare bit of wood before we do anything. You can see that, almost see that puff of smoke as I lift it off, which shows that it's really, really hot now. But again, if you're quick, you can make some fairly narrow, fine lines, as long as you don't let the pen linger on the wood. So if I let it linger, immediately it burns a big hole in the wood. So you've got to be really careful now. That's what the practice is all about, of course. And just go for those sort of darker bits, thinking about the tips of some of our spines. There we go. Using the edge of the wire in this case, of course. Don't panic if you find you're going too quick and not leaving it as dark a mark as you wanted. You can go back and add a little bit more. Resist the temptation just to press on a bit more or let the tip linger. Otherwise you'll find you'll burn a pretty big hole. So be patient, treat it gently. It's better to do that than to do that. Okay? So keep the pen moving when you're on the highest heat, unless you want to get that really dark textured background, for example, which looks really good. We'll probably explore that sort of darker textured background on a future video. And of course, what you can't gauge on just watching the video is the smell. Personally, I don't worry about that too much. It doesn't generate an awful lot of smoke. It all depends on what material you're burning on as to whether you should have the window open or something to take away the smoke, a fan or something like that. But generally speaking, if you're on just an ordinary piece of wood, especially unvarnished wood, then you shouldn't have a problem. If you're at all worried about it, then get a little fan to blow the smoke away. What little smoke there will be. There's obviously going to be more smoke when you're on the highest setting. But you've got to be careful not to aim that fan at your pyrography pen, because that will cool the nib down as you're working. You don't want to do that necessarily. So I would probably in normal circumstances just recommend just having a window open, working near a window perhaps, if you're bothered. If you're working on a really large piece with lots of heat and lots of burning, then some ventilation would be a good thing. We're just going to get a few more little spines in around the edge just to finish his shape. And I think next time we come back to this on the next video, we'll probably have a look at doing some decoration, some simple decoration around the edge of the board. And then maybe to apply some colour or different stains to your pyro piece. Turn the heat down just a tad again. Fantastic on here. There we go. So the heat goes out of these very quickly. A little bit more shading around the ears and some of the depths in here. So for the first part of our Hedgehog cheeseboard, that should be enough. I'm just going to turn off my iron, take the putty rubber and just make sure I get rid of all those additional bits of pencil. Clean it up as much as possible. You can wash it, of course, as well. So there's our little hedgehog, cute little hedgehog, pyroed onto a wooden cheeseboard. And as I say, maybe next time we're going to have a look at doing some decoration around it, adding some colour or different coloured stains. Hope you've enjoyed it. Do subscribe to my YouTube channel for more videos, more pyro videos, as well as other more standard art tutorials, of course. Thanks for watching, and see you again next time.